All right, so much art history and never enough time to cover it all. So let's go run through the art museum. We are still in chapter 29, and we're going to take a look at surrealism. To get to know surrealism, you need to know this guy, Sigmund Freud. Have you guys had the psychology class? All right. So did you guys discuss Freud in there? Yeah. So Freud was interested in the development of the body and mind and the ways these developments impacted one's personality. According to Freud, our personalities are developed by the id, the ego, and the superego. The id is the impulsive part of the psyche that seeks pleasure, especially sexual pleasure, and avoids pain. The id is an unconscious part of your brain, and it has could have some very dangerous ideas or thoughts or desires that it wants you to do, and it's your superego that keeps that id in check. So the ego mediates between the id and the superego. The ego tries to satisfy the id while making decisions that increase pleasure in ways that are socially acceptable without leading to destructive actions. This balance of action and desire is often played out in our unconscious minds, and we are not always aware of our urges, our drives, and our impulses. These instincts then play into one's psychosexual development, the mental and physical development of all people from infancy to adulthood. And Freud was also interested in dreams as the space where the unconscious desires, repressed memories, or neuroses could be played out without control of the superego. By scrutinizing dream content, Freud argued that one could gain insight into one's unconscious internal state. Freud legitimized the importance of dreams and the unconscious as valid revelations of human emotion and desires. He exposed the complex and repressed worlds of sexuality, violence, and desire. When we look at this surrealist art, a lot of it's going to feel very dreamy, something like out of a dream. All right, I want to introduce you to this guy right here, Andre Breton. He was a writer and he was the leader of the surrealist movement. And I want to stress that surrealism is an offshoot of Dada art. There's going to be some objects that we're going to look at that look a lot like Dada. In the early 1920s, writers like Breton became very involved with Dada. The writers shared Dada's interest in anarchy and revolution, but they felt Dada lacked clear direction for political action. In late 22, they left Dada and they began looking to the mind as a source for social liberation. Breton said that artists should bypass reason and rationality by accessing their unconscious mind. Some of these techniques became known as automatism or automatic writing. These techniques allowed artists to bypass conscious thought and embrace chance when creating art. Surrealism, the name means beyond realism. They're seeking the truth beyond the conscious physical realm. And he attempted to find an art form that liberated the subconscious mind from the constraints of everyday rational conscious thought. So he wrote this surrealist manifesto. You can see a picture of it there up on the screen. The surrealist writers embraced stream of consciousness writing. Have you ever read stream of consciousness writing? You've read it? Yeah, it's writing exactly what's on your mind at that time, and whatever thoughts are popping into your head, you're just writing it down, and it makes no sense because what's going on in the other person's head, even though they're writing it down as they're thinking it, makes no sense to us, as though it makes sense to them. And so, stream of consciousness writing is some of the most difficult writing. So, one parlor game that the surrealist writers would do is that each person would write down a word on a piece of paper and then fold it over and pass it to the next person to add a word. And then they'll continue doing that until the sentence is made. And then they all read it out loud and have a big laugh. Another thing that surrealists like a game that surrealists would play, would be called automatic drawing, where you just scribble on a piece of paper, and then as you scribble, shapes begin to form and you would start accentuating the shapes that you see. So I'm going to show you an example of that right here. So as they draw, they begin to see shapes and then they would exaggerate some lines and ignore others. That creates weird drawings. Okay, I'm going to move on. Another game that they would play would be what's called the exquisite corpse. You probably did this in maybe in elementary or middle school. Is that you would draw a head with a neck and then fold the piece of paper, and then the person would continue the neck and draw the body, and then fold the piece of paper, and the next person would continue and draw the legs and fold the piece of paper, and then the last person would draw the feet. And everybody's drawing something different, and when you unfold it, it looks really silly like this. But this is that letting go of what's rational and expected. Okay, there's two basic kinds of surrealism. The first is called naturalistic surrealism. And naturalistic surrealism looks a lot like this. Does this look like a space that you could live in? Yeah? You could imagine yourself standing on that ground, going back into the distance, maybe entering one of these buildings, maybe having an interaction with that girl. All right, that's quite naturalistic. So De Chirico, the artist of this, he would do these. This is very typical of De Chirico. He would do these dreamlike scenes, and he would do these simplified depictions of desolate classic cityscapes. He would exaggerate the linear perspective. Do you see the linear perspective in that with the orthogonals going back into space? But look at what's weird about this is that the orthogonals of the building on the left point to a vanishing point over here somewhere. If you continue these lines out this way, they meet over here. But this building right here points down here and here and here. Its vanishing point is somewhere over here. It doesn't make any sense to have these two buildings in the same space. That's the bizarre part of it. It's this real but unreal space. Also typical of De Chirico is having these dark, threatening skies and with diagonal patterns of stark shadows implying a sunset and an overall sense of menace. The girl's going to meet up with some bad activity. I do want to point out that what that girl is playing with is a hoop. That was a popular children's toy to have a hoop and a stick, and you run along with the hoop and the stick, and you make the circle travel like you. Aren't you glad you guys have cell phones now? You could be more entertained than this. Children's toys have come a long way in 100 years. And also very typical of De Chirico is to have this eerie mood and strange artificiality of the cityscape. These haunted streets we might encounter in our dreams. Critics described De Chirico's paintings as dream writings. These are the typical size of a De Chirico painting. And then I also want to point out he uses a lot of classical imagery in his art. Can you point out the classical imagery? And by classical, I'm talking about ancient Greek sculpture, ancient Roman sculpture and architecture. What do you see in here that's classical? Yeah, this head right here. This could easily be a head of a Greek or I would think a Greek sculpture that we looked at last semester. Here we have this classical architecture here, a sculpture in the center, and he does do a lot of work with what looks like mannequins. All right, we have a De Chirico in this room right here. It's over here in the corner, but I'm giving you a sense of the size of the artwork. And this is our De Chirico here called the Rose Tower. And we have this imposing structure in the middle. You see a little bit of an equestrian sculpture with some architecture on the left and the right. They think that this building right here, this is a Roman tower, and that this is where he got the idea for this one from. And then also there is a equestrian sculpture in this plaza that De Chirico had visited. There's a story about how Nietzsche was in this plaza and he saw a horse being beaten, and he tried to stop the horse being beaten, and he wasn't able to stop it. He ran home and went into a deep depression about what he witnessed, and that's when he came up with his many of his philosophies. But you can see this sculpture shows up in a lot of De Chirico paintings. And we are going to move on to our next surrealist artist is Dorothea Tanning. She's an American, and this is a self-portrait that she made for her 30th birthday. One thing I want you to notice is look at the doors that are behind her. There's a door here that she's opening, but there's another door here and another door here. You can see a little bit of a door here, and here there's another door, and the doors, it feels like goes back into infinity right here. These doors are symbolic of the parts of the mind. As you go through the one door after another, you go into deeper states of your mind. And then there's another painting by her of this one with these two children on this. It looks like it might be at a hotel or in a mansion or something. But at the top of the stairs, we have these two girls that are interacting with this giant sunflower. And we assume that this is a nocturnal scene because it looks like a dream. She had a sister, and she had a very rough upbringing. She had very religious, strict parents, and she did not have a lot of freedom as a child. So she would escape through imagination. But one weird thing about this one, if you look closely at that girl, the hair doesn't quite match the forehead. So it looks like it's a doll. The sunflower is a common flower from her hometown, and here she used it as a symbol of identity. The message here is not that there is a literal attack to overcome, but rather an ongoing expedition to survive one's own intense psychology. All right, so the story goes is that she is sitting in a cafe here and she's talking to Picasso. She's having lunch with Picasso and another artist, and they're having a conversation. And Picasso and the other artist are admiring the bracelet Merritt was wearing that was covered in fur. Picasso, it says something like, "You can cover anything with fur." And Oppenheim said, "Yeah, even this cup and saucer." And so on the way home, she bought a cup and saucer and she put fur on it. This image right here, this is the heart of surrealism. It's a collision of things that don't belong together in order to rupture our sense of normalcy. Like, can you imagine drinking from this or using the spoon on this? Some artists or some art historians have talked about because she's a woman, she's using domestic objects. And they wonder would a man artist have made the same decisions that she did. The teacup, the saucer, the spoon all relate to femininity as well as fur. And then we have like it's not all covered. So underneath the saucer, you can see the porcelain. And there's a striking and aggressive relationship between the cool, crisp porcelain and the fur. And then when we compare this to a Mary Cassatt painting, she was an impressionist. And we have these ladies drinking tea. We have such a clash of reactions to this. With the painting of the ladies drinking tea, that's so nice. It's such a nice painting. It's so sweet, or it's pleasant. Whereas the cup and saucer covered in fur is so jarring and disturbing. So our conscious mind and our civilized mind, our public mind, is repelled by this. And the subconscious mind is attracted to it. There's a degree of unconscious desire to know what it feels like to drink tea from this cup. And we have to keep that desire hidden because other people will think we're weird. The conflict is between the conscious and subconscious, or the conflict between the subconscious and conscious is what makes this so deeply uncomfortable. And this object brings together polite society and the interior of the self. Now, Merritt Oppenheim, this is her most famous object that she made, but she made lots of other art. But people only know her for the teacup covered in fur. And that really bothered her. And this was definitely not her only work, but the teacup overshadowed all of her other work. She became famous, but for only one work of art. and she hated that she created it because it was how others saw her. And so even now, when Google honors her on her birthday, it's almost an insult if they really knew how she felt about the furry teacup. And then I was scrolling through Facebook today, and I found this. This is another art history teacher in another high school, and some of his students made a furry teacup and saucer.